When Ethan Valcourt was 11, he dreamt of a wolf stitched together from orphaned shadows. Its paws were torch flames, licking the corridors of his childhood home, reducing wallpaper, toys, and pictures to a drifting, ember-dusted ash. He woke weeping, certain the smoke in his nose was real. That morning his mother found him in the hallway, staring at a Sing teddy bear that, moments earlier, had been perfectly whole. No one believed the dream had burned anything. No one, not even the boy, understood how it had reached through the veil of sleep to scorch the living room rug. Years passed, and nightmares continued to bleed from Ethan's sleeping mind into waking life, in small, unsettling ways. Burnt food though the stove was off, closets flung open though the latch was drawn shut, mirrors spider-webbed with cracks that vanished when someone else turned on the light. Teachers called it an overactive imagination, priests called it spiritual warfare, and doctors spoke of hypnagogic hallucinations while prescribing pills that fogged Ethan's days but left his nights unguarded. He learned to accept that sleep was a dangerous border country only he could cross, and that returning always carried customs fees of char and tremor. When Ethan turned 25, he was living in a cold, stuttering apartment in Montrelez, freelancing as a portraitist for the mildly wealthy. He had cultivated a manner nobody questioned, quiet, polite, with a painter's habit of watching people longer than was comfortable. On a rain-oiled evening, he walked into the antique store at Rue de Lille, compelled by a faint tugging in his ribs. The shop smelled of camphor and wilted newspaper, an odor that reminded him of the way dreams rot when morning arrives too quickly. The proprietor was an impossibly thin old woman, with silvery braids pinned like serpents around her head. She examined him with pupils so bright they seemed freshly painted. "You're leaking," she said, voice papery. Ethan blinked, looked down. A thin smear of red had appeared along his wrist where no cut existed. A bubble of crimson slid out of the flesh like dew. He wiped it, confused and embarrassed, murmuring that sometimes his skin wept without reason. She led him behind rusted armor and stacks of cracked phonographs to a curtained alcove. There, hanging against brick, was a single canvas, roughly a meter square, primed but untouched, except for a faint shimmer as though pearl dust had been mixed into the gesso. "It was carried here by a sailor dying of sleep," the woman said. "He claimed it could hold horrors if given the proper ink." Ethan denied her offer twice, explaining he painted only commissioned likenesses and still lifes. The third refusal dissolved on his tongue when the fluorescent bulbs flickered and, for a heartbeat, he smelled burning fur. His childhood wolf trotting nearby. He purchased the canvas, paying with 3 jobs' worth of savings and a promise to return once it was filled. Back in his apartment, Ethan sat before the blank surface until dawn cracked the shutters. He thought of the medications he no longer swallowed, of therapist voices drowned beneath a consistent roar of sulfur and fur. Then he cut a thin groove in his forearm with a palette knife and let the blood drip into a porcelain bowl. He mixed it with ultramarine, raw umber and ivory black, until the solution deepened into something that swallowed light rather than reflected it. At first, he painted rapidly, desperate to finish before the blood coagulated, arching lines that suggested teeth, sinews, and a maw where night itself might curl in fetal position. But as the composition grew, he felt each stroke tighten like knots in a fisherman's net. The more detail he added, the calmer his mind became, as though the wolf willingly folded itself into the oil and plasma prison. 5 hours later, he collapsed on the paint-splattered tarp, chest heaving. The canvas stank of copper and ash, yet the air around him was still, unthreatened. He slept for 12 hours without a dream. When he woke, an autumn sun spilled between the blinds, and for the first time since boyhood, Ethan registered silence inside his head. No footfalls of some reptilian prey, no distant hum of flapping wings. He laughed, delirious. The painting, however, was still wet. Remembering every violent dawn that had clawed him awake, he decided not to wait. He hauled the canvas onto the fire escape, balanced it between rusted iron bars, and angled it toward the sun so the chill breeze might quicken the drying. Hours later he returned. The wolf, once viscous, had hardened into glossy ridges and matte valleys. Ethan ran a tentative fingertip across a fang and felt cold enamel. Relief blossomed in his lungs. He propped the piece against his bedroom wall and lay down, sure that captivity would hold. That night no dream stalked him. The next night remained equally uneventful. Elated, he began another canvas, this time intentionally inducing a nightmare by skipping meals, drinking bitter coffee, and looping dissonant violin concertos until exhaustion folded him beneath their keening. He awoke screaming beside a vision of a faceless choir chanting from jaws sewn shut with barbed wire. He painted them, mixing fresh blood with ochre and Payne's gray, capturing every unseeing eye, every rusted needle. Again, when the painting dried in full sunlight, the voices inside his skull fell quiet. Within 6 months, Ethan had trapped a menagerie. The torso thick with bees, the archer with glass-blown bones, the tide that reeked of grave dirt. Each piece delivered him another night of undisturbed sleep. The walls of his apartment narrowed with tilting rectangles of terror, but he no longer felt threatened by them. He felt in control. He noted a curious pattern. While still tacky, the paintings thrummed and whispered like captured animals. Yet once the surface cured, they fell inert, as though the very evaporation of moisture anchored the horror. Of course, a painter needs money. Commissions had withered. No one wanted staid portraits once they'd glimpsed the uncanny chiaroscuro of Ethan's new style in casual photos he posted online. A gallery owner, Gerard Moutin, visited expecting dark romanticism. He arrived with 2 assistants and a timid art critic, all prepared to be politely bored. They left an hour later, pale and ecstatic, carrying promises of a debut exhibition and unsheathed checkbooks. Ethan insisted on only one clause: no piece could hang until fully dry. Moutin laughed, thinking the artist eccentric about varnish times, and agreed. The vernissage was scheduled for December 23rd. Invitations, a matte black card embossed with a skeletal moth, found their way into the pockets of couture designers, horror writers, and sleep-deprived tech magnates. The exhibit's title, Le sang du sommeil, the blood of sleep, was whispered with relish in Montreuil's cafes. Questions about the medium swirled. Some claimed Ethan used ox blood. Others said powdered meteors struck into turpentine. The truth, that every nightmare was locked behind a membrane of his own clotting cells, remained unpublicized, yet the rumors clung to it like static. Ethan shipped 18 works, each labeled with cunning euphemism. Nocturne 1 through XVOIR. He delivered explicit instructions. Hang only once the gel takes on a mirror fin. The curator nodded, dismissive. When Ethan left the gallery to rest before opening night, the staff arranged the paintings immediately. Some pieces, still gummy, exhaled soft rasps that the interns mistook for the ventilation system protesting winter. They sealed the crates, left them leaning near radiators to hurry the process. Opening night glittered with silver canopies and anxious laughter. Crystal goblets chimed. Ethan, pale even more than usual, wore charcoal linen dabbled unintentionally with flecks of dried crimson that no laundering could remove. He greeted patrons with measured courtesy, scanning each canvas obsessively. Under the bright track lights, he saw minute wetness still lingering in recesses where his brush had laid thick impasto. A pulse of unease shivered his spine. At 8:30, a novelist named Halima Rostand paused in front of Nocturne 7, the archer with glass-blown bones. She leaned closer, charmed by the bizarre. In that instant, the lamplight caught a still moist micro-ridge along a translucent elbow. The paint popped, spider-cracking like thawed lake ice. A sigh issued from the canvas. Not metaphorical, a literal exhalation, smelling of burnt sugar and formaldehyde. Halima's champagne flute shattered in her hand. Bleeding, she staggered back. A gust of brilliant points, like diamond dust, burst out and swirled over her throat. She dropped, eyes rolling white and did not rise. Screams ricocheted through the room, and panic rippled outward. Mouton tried to usher guests to safety, certain some chemical reaction had occurred, but Nocturne 3i ruptured next, the torso thick with bees. Paint split, releasing a column of insects black as crude oil, wings vibrating faster than strobe light. They clouded the air, embedding stingers of frozen pitch into any skin exposed. People bolted toward double doors only to find them jammed by some invisible pressure, as if the gallery itself had inhaled. Ethan pushed forward, clutching his hair, understanding too late that the drying process was incomplete. Heat from overhead lights and crowded bodies had reliquefied what daylight had almost cured. The moisture had returned, re-wetting the prison bars. Now the nightmares he'd caught were free to incarnate, dripping into the tangible world like venom. Nocturne 3 split apart, unveiling the tide that reeked of grave dirt, a current of earth-brown fluid, thick with white fragments that might once have been shells or teeth, spilled across polished concrete. It lapped against high heels, dissolving leather and flesh equally. Metallic groans sounded from the pipes in the walls, as though the plumbing was choking on cemetery soil. Ethan swore and sprinted for the circuit breaker. If he could kill the lights, maybe lower the temperature, evaporation would halt and wetness would cling, perhaps, delaying escape. But the corridor to the utility closet was already invaded by milky smoke, the choir, with sewn mouths, their phantom hymns vibrating through ductwork, rattling the aluminum like bones in a bucket. As he stumbled back into the main gallery, Ethan saw a man attempting to bash Nocturne with a chair leg, convinced destroying the canvas would stop its spawn. But the painting imploded before impact, releasing the wolf of ashen fur. Its flaming paws left soot circles upon marble. It eyed Ethan with a gaze he had felt in dreams his entire life. This time, the creature was unbound by abstraction. More horrifying. Ethan sensed it recognized its jailer. There were still 2 untouched canvases, both so heavily layered that only thin edges remained damp. Ethan's eyes locked on a fire extinguisher. Foam. Thick. Cold. Sludge. He seized the canister, recalling studio accidents where aqueous fixatives created a skin over paint, slowing the cure. He sprinted to Nocturne 6, 7, depressed the lever, and coated the surface. As the white frost settled, the twitching imagery beneath appeared to still, as though drowsy. Another intern tried to replicate the trick on Nocturne X, but the archer's quiver had already ripped open, and glimmering arrowheads cascaded out, like hail flecked with broken mirrors. They perforated the extinguisher tank, sending the boy skidding across blood-slick floor. Overhead sprinklers finally triggered not by fire, but by smoke from fused lighting fixtures. A half-flooded gallery should have helped, Ethan reasoned, water promoting dryings opposite. Yet when he touched a droplet, he felt its warmness. Near body temperature, the nightmares had heated the room to a fever. The water hissed against the wolf's paws, giving off steam that smelled of scorched blankets. Through the chaos, Ethan heard the old woman's papery voice, though she was nowhere present. It will hold horrors if given the proper ink. She had never promised permanence. She had merely sold possibility. He realized the loophole. The cage stayed locked only under the strict condition of absolute dryness. Anything short allowed slippage. His blood, now mingling with patron's blood across the floor, was rewriting the bounds. He stumbled toward the main doors, physical weight of exhaustion doubling him over. Survivors pounded glass from outside, unable to enter because the street-facing side remained locked by city ordinance until events ended. Inside, the nightmares multiplied. The grave dirt tide meeting sprinkler water turned to sludge, dotted by pale hands that pawed upward like roots seeking sun. Bees, arrows, smoke, and ash collided until the air itself fibrillated. In the middle of it all, the wolf approached Ethan. Its pelt flickered, embers shedding, leaving ephemeral scorch marks in mid-air. Ethan's throat tightened with childhood terror, but something in him balked at surrendering again to helplessness. He thought of the sailor dying of sleep, of the priest's warnings, of every failed pill. He lifted the empty fire extinguisher, swung it at a ceiling spotlight. Glass exploded, plunging that corner into gloom. He smashed a second, then a third. Each time, darkness expanded. The wolf hesitated. Ethan shouted above screams, "Kill the lights! Cool the room!" Those still conscious obeyed, flinging shoes, cameras, whatever reached to shatter bulbs. One woman hurled a champagne bucket into a fuse box. Sparks leapt, and half the gallery went black. Instantly, the temperature dipped. Sprinkler water lost its steam, returning to a normal chill. Under encroaching darkness, the nightmare slowed, silhouettes guttering like candles robbed of oxygen. The wolf growled, jaws puffing cinder clouds, but its stride shortened. Resinous scabs formed over its shoulders, the pigment stiffening. Arrows mid-slight froze, suspended like sculptures. Bees dropped, carapaces epoxy-glossed. The grave dirt tide congealed, earth becoming stiff clay. Ethan seized buckets of paint thinner from a supply closet and tossed their cold contents in arcs across any canvas still damp. Solvent wicked moisture out, leaving streaks of chemical burn, but accelerating the cure. He doused the choir, who croaked one final harmonic before ossifying into silence. The room, once a carnival of terror, held its breath. Walls crackled as new layers of dried fear sealed themselves. Emergency crews battered the doors open at last, flooding the space with red strobes that briefly threatened to reawaken pigment. Ethan shouted for them to cut sirens. Recognizing the carnage, 6 dead, dozens wounded, they ushered survivors away. The wolf remained 2 meters from Ethan, immobilized mid-step, a sniff, frozen to the curve of its nostrils. He could see each carbonized hair pinned beneath the lacquer of his own blood. Investigators asked questions that had no sane answers. Electrical malfunction and coordinated hallucination became the official narrative. The gallery closed indefinitely. Lawsuits sprouted. Ethan, though battered by guilt, avoided prison because no security camera captured strict cause and effect between painter and disaster. He was, to the courts, an unlucky artist whose bizarre materials proved toxic. He returned to his apartment stripped of canvases. Night fell, yet he refused sleep. Instead, he studied the wounds along his arms, scars cross-hatched from months of intentional bleeding. The compulsion to paint new nightmares writhed inside him, but now he feared permanence less than outbreak. He understood the rule. While wet, the horror is a beast. When dry, it is a trophy. Moisture is the thin membrane between dream and stone. In the pre-dawn hush, Ethan approached his easel. Not to create, but to destroy. He smashed his jars of pigment, blotted puddles with ragged towels, and sealed them in garbage bags. But the artist's eye, even in revulsion, sees possibility. In the broken glass he noticed reflections, shapes reminiscent of things yet undreamed. He realized nightmares were not finite. They bred in the folds of human potential. Even if he never painted again, someone else would. He remembered the old woman's shop, the single canvas shimmering like a promise. Perhaps there were more such canvases waiting in dusty back rooms, hungry for blood. The sailor, the proprietor, himself, were they links in a chain or cogs in a wheel? Ethan imagined a clandestine lineage of sleep-haunted artisans handing down blank, thirsty surfaces. Toward sunrise, he fell into a chair, eyelids trembling. Fear of dreams warred against exhaustion. He considered whether to tape his eyes open, but desisted. Maybe, he thought, true penance was not avoidance, but endurance, meeting the wolf each night unarmed and allowing it to devour him until nothing remained to manifest. Such courage, however, felt impossible. Instead, he took a fountain pen, uncapped it, and pricked his finger against the bead of red swelled. He wrote on the bare wall above his desk, "Dry everything." Below it he scrawled, "Or the wet will walk." Then he bandaged his hands, shut off every radiator, and opened all windows to let the winter howl through rooms stripped of subject matter. He climbed into bed, clothed in wool, knowing that cold keeps things still. Outside, Montrelais stirred with bakery smells and distant church bells. Ordinary things that occur while people sleep without fear. Ethan lay on his side, watching vapor form at his mouth, repeating a new mantra, dry, dry, dry. When sleep finally claimed him, the wolf appeared in the distance of a black plane, pacing but unable to approach, as though atmosphere itself had solidified between them. In the dream, Ethan exhaled, saw the breath crystallize, and thought, perhaps the price of peace is vigilance, not abstinence. He would have to wake often, check the walls, touch the windowsills, feel for dampness the way a medic feels for a pulse. Far away the wolf sat, tail igniting sparks that died on contact with the frozen ground. They stared at one another until the dream faded like frost under a cautious sun. Outside, the realm of sleep, the room remained bitterly cold, paintless and dry, and for now, that was enough.